The city of Asheville, North Carolina, is a place of contrasts, a unique jewel cradled within the ancient weathered peaks of the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's a city that breathes with a dual lung, one filled with the crisp, cool air of mountain tradition, the other with the vibrant, sometimes hazy, smoke of modern bohemianism. On one street, you can find a craftsman hunched over a workbench, practicing a trade passed down through generations. On the next, a drum circle might erupt spontaneously, its rhythm echoing off the Art Deco facades of the downtown buildings. It is a city of artists and bankers, of mystics and mechanics, all drawn to the magnetic pull of these majestic, slumbering giants that surround and protect the valley. But the mountains hold more than just beauty. They hold secrets. The forests are deep, the hollows are secluded, and the sense of isolation can be as profound as the panoramic vistas from the parkway. It was in this world, a world balanced between the communal energy of the city and the profound solitude of the mountains, that 18-year-old Zeb Wayne Quinn was charting the first course of his adult life. By every measure and every account from those who knew him, Zeb was a study in gentleness. He was not a young man given to grand pronouncements or dramatic gestures. His presence was a calmer, more reassuring one. Friends from Robertson High School, from which he had graduated just the year before, in 1999, remembered him as the quiet cornerstone of their group, the one you could count on for a thoughtful ear or a ride home, no questions asked. He had a lanky frame and a kind, open face that seemed to always be on the verge of a smile. He wore his hair short and neat, and his eyes, clear and observant, took in the world with a placid curiosity. He was, in a word, grounded. While some of his peers were wrestling with the uncertainties of their futures, Zeb had a plan. He was an employee at the local Walmart, working diligently in the electronics department. It wasn't a glamorous job, but for Zeb, it was a means to an end, a steady paycheck that he managed with a responsibility that belied his 18 years. He was saving, meticulously, for something that represented the next chapter of his independence. A car, specifically, a sporty deep blue Mitsubishi Eclipse that he had found for sale. This car was more than just a machine of metal and glass. It was a vessel for his burgeoning adulthood, a tangible symbol of his hard work and his dreams for the road ahead. His life was an orderly one, built on the foundations of family and responsibility. He was exceptionally close with his mother, Denise, and his sister, Brandy, sharing a bond of easy affection and mutual respect. The Quinn household was one of warmth and routine, a safe harbor in the often turbulent sea of late adolescence. Zeb was a homebody at heart, a young man who found comfort in the familiar and fulfillment in his obligations. He was not a part of the burgeoning late-night scene in downtown Asheville. He was the son who called when he was going to be late, the employee who never missed a shift, the friend who always kept his word. It was this very predictability, this unwavering steadiness, that would make his sudden, inexplicable disappearance all the more terrifying. On the second day of the new millennium, the quiet, orderly world of Zeb Quinn was about to collide with a force of unimaginable chaos, and the resulting silence would echo through the Blue Ridge Mountains for decades to come. If you want to hear more true crime stories, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. ****, Sunday, January 2nd, 2000, dawned cold and clear over Buncombe County. At the Walmart Supercenter on Hendersonville Road, the day unfolded with the familiar, managed chaos of a weekend. The cavernous space, a cathedral of commerce, buzzed with the sounds of rattling shopping carts, beeping scanners, and the low hum of thousands of fluorescent lights. Zeb Quinn arrived for his shift, navigating the bustling aisles to his station in the electronics department. This was his domain, a landscape of television screens displaying silent, endless loops of vibrant color, of stereos waiting to blast music that was never played, of video game consoles promising digital worlds of adventure. Here, Zeb was knowledgeable and patient, explaining the intricacies of a new stereo system to a customer, or helping a parent choose the right video game for their child. Among the sea of blue-vested employees was another young man, Robert Jason Owens. At 20 years old, Owens was a few years Zeeb's senior, and the two had struck up a casual workplace friendship. Owens was, by many accounts, more outgoing than Zeb, quicker with a joke, with an undercurrent of restless energy that stood in contrast to Zeeb's calm demeanor. They were part of a loose-knit group of younger employees who found camaraderie in the shared experience of working retail, the long hours, the sometimes demanding customers, the mutual desire for something more. On this particular Sunday, Zeeb's quiet excitement was a noticeable current running beneath his usual placid surface. He spoke animatedly with Owens and a few other colleagues about the Mitsubishi Eclipse. The plan was firming up, solidifying from a dream into a tangible reality. The seller was in Leicester, a small, unincorporated community to the west of Asheville, and Zeb had arranged to see the car that very evening, as soon as their shift ended at 9 p.m. Owens, ever the helpful friend, had offered to come along to provide a second opinion, another set of eyes to look over the engine and kick the tires. As the hours of the shift ticked by, marked by the periodic announcements over the store's intercom, the anticipation grew. For Zeb, 9 p.m. was not just the end of a workday. It was the beginning of a new chapter. No one, least of all Zeb himself, could have possibly sensed the dark prelude that was being composed in the mundane setting of a department store. The final transactions were completed, the cash registers were reconciled, and the closing announcements echoed through the emptying store. Zeb and Owens clocked out, their time cards stamped with the final, ordinary moments of a life that was about to be irrevocably shattered. Outside, the vast parking lot was a sea of glittering asphalt under the tall, orange glow of the security lamps. The January night air was crisp and thin. The two young men walked out of the bright, sterile environment of the store and into the waiting darkness, each heading towards a destiny that neither could have foreseen. The unblinking, dispassionate eye of a Walmart security camera, mounted high on the building's exterior, captured the last known, independently verified images of Zeb Quinn. The footage, time-stamped at approximately 9:15 p.m., is ghostly and grainy, a silent film of the pivotal moments before the void. In these fleeting images, Zeb and Jason Owens are seen exiting the store. They don't walk together, but rather peel off in separate directions, their paths diverging as they head towards their respective vehicles. Zeb, a solitary figure moving with purpose, walks to his car, a pale blue 1990 Mazda Protege. It was a reliable, if unremarkable, vehicle, the very car he was so eager to replace with the sportier, more stylish Eclipse. He unlocks the door, slips inside, and a moment later, the car's headlights cut through the gloom. A short distance away, Owens gets into his own vehicle, a dark-colored Ford pickup truck. For a moment, the two vehicles are just two among hundreds in the sprawling lot. Then, one by one, they pull out of their parking spaces. Zeeb's Mazda navigates the lane, its brake lights flashing as it turns towards the exit. Owens's truck follows a similar path. They leave the Walmart property separately, turning onto the busy stretch of Hendersonville Road, their headlights dissolving into the stream of nighttime traffic. Their immediate plan was to meet just a short distance away at an Eckerd pharmacy before driving in a two-car convoy to Leicester. This brief, intermediate stop was the first event to occur outside the view of any cameras, the first moment to rely solely on the testimony of the survivor. The journey itself should have been straightforward. The route to Leicester from South Asheville would have taken them west, away from the city's commercial heart, onto roads that grew progressively darker and more rural. They would have passed familiar landmarks, gas stations, and convenience stores, their bright lights serving as lonely beacons in the encroaching darkness of the countryside. The roads would have narrowed, the houses growing farther apart, replaced by dark swaths of farmland and dense, silent woods. This was the landscape of Zeeb's final journey, a drive through the familiar territory of his home county. But somewhere along this route, on a dark stretch of asphalt, the narrative of the evening would fracture. The objective, verifiable timeline captured by the security camera would end, and a new, deeply disturbing story would begin, a story told by a single voice. A voice that would become the sole narrator of Zeb Quinn's last moments on Earth. The hum of the Mazda's engine, the glow of its dashboard lights, the familiar feel of the steering wheel in his hands. These were the last certainties of Zeb's life. Everything that followed would be swallowed by the night. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The official version of Zeb Quinn's final moments, the only narrative the world would have for nearly 2 decades, was crafted and told by Robert Jason Owens. It's a story that begins with a sudden, unexpected flash of headlights in his rearview mirror. According to Owens, as they were driving towards Leicester, Zeb abruptly signaled for him to pull over. The two vehicles crunched to a halt on the gravel shoulder of a dark, unspecified road. Zeb, Owens claimed, seemed agitated. He explained that he had just received a numeric page, a common form of communication in the days before ubiquitous cell phones. He seemed to know who it was from, and was insistent that he needed to return the call immediately. Finding a payphone, Zeb reportedly made his call. When he returned to the 2 parked cars, his agitation had escalated into what Owens would later describe as panic or frantic energy. He was no longer the calm, collected friend from work. He was a different person, a young man in the grip of some unseen emergency. "I can't go," Zeb allegedly told Owens, his voice tight with an urgency that made no sense. "I've got to go. I'll see you later." Before Owens could fully process the sudden change of plans, Zeb rushed back to his Mazda. It was then, in a moment of supposed chaotic haste, that the story took its most bizarre and violent turn. Owens claimed that Zeb, in his hurry to leave, threw the Mazda into reverse, swinging the car around recklessly. The maneuver was clumsy, and the rear of the Mazda slammed into the front fender of Owens's Ford pickup truck. The sound of crunching metal and shattering plastic echoed briefly in the night air. It was not a major collision, but it was a definitive physical event. Zeb, however, did not stop to inspect the damage or exchange apologies. According to Owens, he simply straightened the car out, slammed it into drive, and sped off into the darkness, leaving Owens standing alone on the side of the road with a damaged truck and a story that was, from its very inception, deeply troubling. This account, as relayed by Owens to police in the initial hours of the investigation, was filled with inconsistencies that immediately raised red flags for the detectives. The emotional whiplash of Zeb's supposed behavior from eager anticipation to frantic panic was entirely out of character for the steady young man his family and friends knew. The idea that he would be so consumed by a mysterious page that he would recklessly damage his friend's vehicle and his own, and then simply flee, seemed implausible. Furthermore, Owens's own reaction was perplexing. He claimed to have been left on the roadside, yet he didn't immediately call the police to report the hit and run. He didn't seem to make any concerted effort to follow Zeb or find out what the emergency was. He simply, by his own account, went home. He would later show investigators the damage to his truck as physical corroboration of his story, and he himself had sustained injuries, a broken rib and a head wound, which he claimed were a result of the collision. But he had not sought medical treatment for these injuries until days later. Another piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. The narrative Owens provided was a carefully constructed box. It explained Zeb's disappearance, it explained the damage to his truck, and it explained his own injuries. But it was a box with no windows, offering no insight, no verifiable details, and no escape from the central, nagging question. Was this the truth, or was it the first, crucial lie in a calculated and monstrous deception? Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. In the quiet of the Quinn family home, the late hours of Sunday night bled into the early, anxious hours of Monday morning. Denise Quinn was a mother whose life revolved around the rhythms of her children. She knew Zeb's schedule, his habits, the sound of his car pulling into the driveway. When that sound never came, a seed of worry was planted. It was small at first, a nagging thought that he might have decided to stay with a friend, that his plans had simply changed. But Zeb was not the kind of son to leave his mother wondering. He was a caller, a checker-in. The silence was, in itself, a message, and it was deeply unsettling. By Monday morning, the worry had grown into a palpable fear that coiled in her stomach. Zeb was scheduled for a shift at Walmart that day. When a call to the store confirmed he hadn't shown up and hadn't called in, the fear bloomed into full-blown panic. This was the absolute confirmation that something was terribly wrong. Zeb did not miss work. He was proud of his job, of his reliability. For him to be a no-call, no-show was not just out of character. It was unthinkable. Denise immediately began a frantic series of phone calls, her voice tight with rising terror as she dialed the numbers of Zeb's friends, his co-workers, anyone who might have seen him or heard from him. Each call ended with the same answer. No one had seen him since he left work the previous night with Jason Owens. The narrative of the evening, as far as anyone knew, ended in the Walmart parking lot. With every passing hour of silence, the abyss of the unknown widened. Finally, with a heavy heart and trembling hands, Denise Quinn made the call that every parent dreads. She dialed the Asheville Police Department and, in a voice strained with emotion, reported her 18-year-old son missing. The initial police response was professional but measured. Cases of young adults going missing were not uncommon. Often, they would reappear within a day or two with a simple explanation. But as the first officer sat with Denise in her living room, listening to her describe her son, a different picture began to emerge. This was not a rebellious teenager or a party-goer who had lost track of time. This was a responsible, dependable young man whose sudden deviation from his routine was a blaring alarm bell. The investigation began to ramp up. The first and most obvious person to speak with was the last person known to have seen Zeb, Jason Owens. When detectives first approached him, Owens appeared calm, cooperative, and concerned. He relayed his strange story of the mysterious page and the fender bender. He showed them the damage to his truck and mentioned his own injuries. His story, while odd, was at least a narrative, a sequence of events that offered a potential, if puzzling, explanation for Zeb's absence. But then, just a couple of days into the investigation, the case took its first truly bizarre turn. A phone call was placed to the Walmart Electronics Department. The man on the other end of the line identified himself as Zeb Quinn. He told the manager who answered that he was sick and wouldn't be able to come in for his shift. But the manager, a man who had worked with Zeb for months, was immediately suspicious. The voice was wrong. It had a different cadence, a different tone. It sounded forced, unnatural. It wasn't Zeb. Sensing that something was deeply amiss, the manager contacted the police. Investigators, now armed with a potentially crucial piece of evidence, moved quickly. They obtained the phone records, and a trace was put on the call. The result came back, and it sent a jolt to the investigation. The call had not been made from a private home or a random payphone. It had been placed from the manufacturing floor of the Volvo construction equipment plant in Asheville. This was the company where Jason Owens worked his other job. The circle of suspicion that had been loosely forming around Owens now snapped tight. When detectives confronted him with this new, damning piece of information, he dropped his calm facade. He admitted it. Yes, he had made the call, but his explanation was, once again, a story that deflected all culpability. He claimed that Zeb himself had asked him to make the call as a favor, but the logic of it crumbled under the slightest scrutiny. Why would Zeb, who had supposedly vanished in a panic, be concerned enough about his job to ask a friend to call in sick for him, but not concerned enough to contact his own terrified mother? The lie was transparent, clumsy, and deeply incriminating. It was the act of a man not covering for a friend, but covering up a crime. Jason Owens was no longer just a witness. He was the prime suspect. Detective David Gauntz of the Asheville Police Department was a man who understood the language of silence. He was a veteran investigator, a man whose features seemed to have been carved by the weight of the stories he carried. He had a calm, deliberate manner that could put witnesses at ease, and a pair of eyes that missed nothing. In the days following Zeb Quinn's disappearance, Gance's world became consumed by the case. It was a puzzle with too many pieces that didn't fit, a story with a narrator he fundamentally did not trust. One night, long after the rest of the department had gone home, Gance found himself alone in the sterile, quiet squad room. The only sounds were the low hum of the overhead lights and the gentle whir of a computer fan. On a large corkboard that dominated one wall was the entire Zeb Quinn case, laid out in a constellation of photographs, notes, and maps. In the center was a smiling, hopeful picture of Zeb, a high school portrait that seemed a world away from the grim reality of the investigation. Surrounding it were photos of his Mazda, pictures of Jason Owens, a map tracing the route from Walmart to Leicester, and printouts of phone records. Gance stood before the board, a lukewarm cup of coffee in his hand, his eyes tracing the lines of string that connected one piece of evidence to another. The strings all led, inevitably, to the photograph of Jason Owens. Gance picked up the report detailing Owens's admission about the phone call to Walmart. He had read it a dozen times, but he read it again, searching for some nuance, some flicker of truth in the lie. Zeb asked me to do it. The simplicity of the excuse was its most insulting feature. It was a child's lie, an explanation so flimsy it was a wonder Owens had bothered to utter it at all. It was the lie of a man who held all the cards and believed no one else was smart enough to even play the game. He walked over to his desk, which was piled high with case files. He pulled out the medical report on Owens's injuries, a broken rib, a laceration on his head. Owens had claimed these were from Zeb's Mazda rear-ending his truck, but Gance had stood on countless accident scenes. He knew the physics of a low-speed collision. While not impossible, those injuries seemed excessive. They felt more personal, more indicative of a struggle, a fight. But there was no evidence of a fight. There was no crime scene at all. There was only the side of a road, somewhere in the dark, and a story. The frustration was a physical weight on his shoulders. He was a man who dealt in facts, in evidence, in things he could see and touch. But the Zeb Quinn case was built on a foundation of smoke. He had a victim who wasn't there, and a suspect who wrapped himself in a cloak of plausible deniability. He felt a deep, profound empathy for Denise Quinn. He had met with her several times, had seen the hope in her eyes slowly curdle into a desperate, agonizing dread. He had made her a silent promise that he would find her son, that he would get her answers. But as he stood alone in the quiet of the station, the answers felt farther away than ever. He looked back at the board, at Zeb's smiling face. "Where are you, son?" he whispered into the empty room. The silence that answered him was vast and terrifying. It was the same silence that had swallowed a young man whole, leaving behind nothing but a bizarre story and a mother's broken heart. Gance knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was not a missing person case. This was a homicide, and the killer was walking free, protected by a story that, for now, could not be broken. For 2 weeks, the investigation languished in this frustrating limbo. Zeb's family and a small army of volunteers scoured the backroads and wooded areas of Buncombe County. They stapled missing person flyers to telephone poles and in the windows of gas stations and grocery stores. Zeb's face, captured in that hopeful high school portrait, looked out from the pages, a silent plea for help. But the mountains kept their secrets. There was no sign of Zeb, and not a single trace of his pale blue Mazda protege. It was as if both car and driver had been erased from existence. Then, on January 16th, 14 days after Zeb vanished, a call came into the police department. It was from a woman who worked near Mission Hospital. She had noticed a car, a Mazda protege, that had been parked in the lot of a nearby restaurant, the Little Pig's Barbecue, for several days. It seemed out of place, abandoned. She provided the license plate number. It was a match. Detective Gance and a team of officers raced to the scene. The parking lot was bustling with the lunchtime crowd, people coming and going, oblivious to the fact that they were moving around a critical piece of a dark and disturbing puzzle. And there it was, Zeeb's Mazda. It was parked at an awkward angle, as if left in a great hurry. The first thing Gantz noticed was the driver's side door was unlocked. The second was the bizarre drawing on the rear windshield. Scrawled in a waxy, garish pink lipstick was a cartoonish face. It consisted of two large circles for eyes and a huge, exaggerated pair of smiling lips. It was a grotesque, mocking caricature, a silent, surreal statement. A uniformed officer peered inside the car and then took a startled step back. "Detective," he said, his voice laced with disbelief. "You need to see this." Gantz moved to the passenger side window and looked in. His mind struggled to process the scene before him. The car's interior was a chaotic mess. The driver's seat was pushed far forward, adjusted for someone much shorter than Zeb. On the floor was a hotel key card, plastic water bottles, and a man's jacket that no one in Zeeb's family would later recognize. But it was the thing in the back that defied all logic. Huddled on the floor behind the passenger seat, shivering but very much alive, was a small, black Labrador mix puppy. The discovery of the dog sent a wave of confusion through the seasoned investigators. In all his years, Gantz had never encountered a crime scene like this. It felt less like the aftermath of a violent act and more like a carefully staged piece of theater. Each item seemed to be a prop, a clue that was meant to be found, but whose meaning was maddeningly obscure. Who draws a lipstick face on the car of a missing person? Why leave a hotel key? And above all, where in the world did the puppy come from? It was a clue that seemed designed to distract, to send the investigation down a rabbit hole of meaningless speculation. The crime scene unit descended on the car, beginning the painstaking process of collecting and cataloging the bizarre collection of evidence. They dusted for fingerprints, swabbed for DNA, and carefully removed each item, bagging and tagging it for the lab. The puppy, a silent, terrified witness to something, was gently lifted from the car and taken to a local animal shelter. It was the only living thing to emerge from the mystery, yet it held no answers. The discovery of the car, which the family had prayed would be the key to finding Zeb, had only served to deepen the enigma. It confirmed their worst fears that Zeb had met with foul play, but had offered no clear path forward. The scene was a taunt, a deliberate act of psychological warfare waged by an unknown perpetrator. Zeb Quinn was still gone, and the trail that had led to his car had now dissolved into a surreal collection of disconnected clues, as strange and unsettling as the smiling lipstick face that stared out at the cold, gray January sky. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The forensic investigation of the Mazda protégé was a deep dive into a sea of contradictions. The vehicle was transported to a secure police garage, where it was placed under harsh, unforgiving lights, every inch of its interior and exterior to be scrutinized. The forensic team, led by a veteran crime scene investigator named Ella Vance, approached the car not as a vehicle, but as a vessel, a sealed capsule that held the last echoes of a violent event. Vance was a meticulous professional, a woman who believed that every contact leaves a trace, and her job was to find those traces and make them speak. The exterior of the car told a story of neglect. A thin film of road grime and winter dirt coated the pale blue paint, except for where the lipstick drawing had been made. The drawing itself was the first major focus. A specialist carefully swabbed the waxy pink residue, hoping to find DNA from the saliva of the person who applied it. They photographed it from every conceivable angle before carefully scraping samples into evidence files. The lipstick itself could be a clue. Was it a common drugstore brand or something more unique? But it was the interior that held the real chaos. Vance directed her team in a systematic grid search of the car's cabin. Nothing was to be touched without being photographed, documented, and logged first. The man's jacket, draped over the passenger seat, was the first item to be carefully removed with sterile tongs. It was a generic, dark-colored windbreaker, the kind of clothing that could belong to anyone. It was immediately sealed in a paper evidence bag to be sent to the lab, where it would be tested for hairs, fibers, DNA, and any other trace evidence. Next was the hotel key card found on the floor. It was from the Best Western, located just across the street from the restaurant parking lot. Detectives were immediately dispatched to the hotel. They checked the records for the days Zeb had been missing. Had anyone suspicious checked in? Had any of the rooms been paid for in cash? Had anyone seen Zeb Quinn? The hotel staff was cooperative, but their records turned up nothing. No one matching Zeeb's or Owens's description had checked in. The key card itself was a dead end. The magnetic stripe was wiped, and it yielded no usable fingerprints. It was another prop on the stage, a clue that led nowhere. The team then turned their attention to the less obvious evidence. They vacuumed the carpets, the seats, and the floor mats, the special filters of the forensic vacuum designed to capture microscopic evidence. Every hair, every fiber, every grain of soil was a potential link to a location or a person. They took swabs from the steering wheel, the gear shift, the door handles, and the radio dials, hoping to isolate a DNA profile that did not belong to Zeb. But the sheer number of people who had likely been in the car over the years made this a daunting task. They found dozens of latent fingerprints, smudged and overlapping, on the windows and dashboard. Most would belong to Zeb or his friends and family. The challenge was to find the one print that didn't belong, the one left behind by the person who had parked the car in that lot. The puppy, while no longer at the scene, had left its own traces, a few dark hairs on the back seat, which were carefully collected. But a dog's hair could not identify a suspect. It only added another layer of inexplicable strangeness to the case. Days turned into weeks in the crime lab. The results began to trickle in, and each one was a fresh disappointment. The swabs from the lipstick yielded no DNA. The jacket contained a mix of common cotton fibers, but nothing that could be traced to a specific person. The fingerprints lifted from the car all came back as either belonging to Zeb Quinn or were too smudged to be identifiable. The vacuumings contained a typical mix of soil and debris from the Asheville area, but no unique mineral or pollen that could point to a specific hidden location. The car, which had seemed so pregnant with clues, had been forensically sterile. It was as if the person who had left it there had been a ghost, someone who moved through the world without leaving a trace. Or, as Detective Gauntz began to suspect, they had been clever. Perhaps the scene wasn't just bizarre. Perhaps it was a deliberate and calculated act of misdirection. The lipstick, the puppy, the hotel key, were they all just red herrings, designed to send the investigation spinning in circles while the real evidence and the real killer slipped away? The forensic dead end was a major blow to the case. Without physical evidence linking a suspect to the car, all they had was Jason Owens and his increasingly unbelievable story. The need to break that story, to find a crack in his carefully constructed wall of lies, became more urgent than ever. The interrogation room was small, gray, and deliberately devoid of comfort. It was a place designed to amplify pressure, to make a person feel isolated and exposed. Jason Owens sat at the small metal table, attempting to project an air of detached cooperation. Across from him sat Detective Gauntz and another, younger detective. Gauntz started the interview softly, going over the same ground they had covered before. He asked Owens to recount, in his own words, the events of January 2nd. Owens recited his story, his voice a practiced monotone. The page, the frantic phone call, the fender bender, Zeb speeding off into the night. It was a script he had rehearsed to perfection. Jason, Gauntz said, his voice quiet but firm, leaning forward slightly. We found the car. A flicker of something surprise. Anxiety passed through Owens's eyes before it was replaced by a mask of concerned curiosity. You did? Where was it? Is he okay? It was in the parking lot of the Little Pigs, over by the hospital, Gauntz said, watching Owens's face intently. But Zeb wasn't there. There were some strange things in the car, though. Puppy. A lipstick drawing on the back window. Do you know anything about that? Owens shook his head, performing a look of utter bewilderment. A puppy? Lipstick? Detective, That makes no sense. I have no idea what you're talking about. The phone call you made to Walmart, Jason. Gans pressed, shifting topics abruptly. You told us Zeb asked you to make it. When did he ask you to do that? Was it before or after he sped off and left you on the side of the road? Owens hesitated for a fraction of a second. The logic trap was closing. It was before, when he got the page. He said he had to go and might not make it to work, so he asked me to call for him if he didn't get in touch. So let me get this straight, Gaunt said, his voice hardening slightly. Zeb receives a mysterious page. It's so panicked that he damages both of your vehicles and flees the scene without a proper explanation. But he has the presence of mind to ask you to call him in sick to Walmart? Does that sound reasonable to you? I'm just telling you what happened, Owen said, his voice taking on a defensive edge. I'm just trying to help. Help us then, Jason, the younger detective interjected, his tone more aggressive. Help us understand how a young man disappears off the face of the earth, and the last person to see him, the person whose story makes no logical sense, is you. Help us understand why you felt the need to lie about that phone call until we proved you made it. It wasn't a lie, Owens insisted, his voice rising. I was doing what he asked. Where did you go after Zeb left? Gaunt asked, his voice returning to a calm, questioning tone. You said you went home. Did you stop anywhere? Did you talk to anyone? No, I just went home. My head hurt from the accident. The accident where you broke a rib, Gaunt stated flatly. That's a pretty serious injury to just go home and sleep on. Most people would go to the emergency room for a broken rib. In fact, Mission Hospital was right there, right next to where the car was eventually found. But you didn't go, did you? Owens was silent, his jaw tight. He was beginning to understand that this was not a simple conversation. This was a strategic dismantling of his story, piece by piece. The detectives could see the sweat beading on his forehead, the way his eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape that wasn't there. For hours they went at him, circling back on the timeline, questioning every detail, pointing out every contradiction. But Owens was resolute. He clung to his story, the only thing that stood between him and a murder charge. He would admit to nothing more. He would offer no new information. As the interrogation ended, Owens was allowed to leave. There was still not enough physical evidence to hold him. But as Detective Gaunt watched him walk out of the station, he knew he was watching a killer who was patient, arrogant, and hiding in plain sight. The case had reached a grim impasse. The physical evidence was a dead end, and the prime suspect was a stone wall. The investigation, for all its frantic energy, was about to enter a long, cold winter of silence. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. To understand the impact of Zeb Quinn's disappearance, one must understand the Asheville of the year 2000. It was a city in transition. For decades, it had been a quiet, somewhat sleepy mountain town, known for its clean air and the architectural grandeur of the Biltmore estate. But by the turn of the millennium, a renaissance was underway. A new wave of artists, chefs, and entrepreneurs were breathing life into the historic downtown, transforming it into the quirky, vibrant cultural hub it is known as today. There was a palpable sense of optimism in the air, a feeling that Asheville was on the cusp of becoming a major destination, a new age mecca. But with this growth came a new set of anxieties. The city was shedding its small-town skin, and with that came a loss of the innocence and perceived safety that had long defined it. The community was grappling with its changing identity, balancing the economic benefits of tourism and development with the fear of losing its unique character and close-knit feel. Zeb Quinn's disappearance landed like a stone in this pool of simmering cultural anxiety. It was a crime that felt deeply out of place, a story that belonged in a gritty, big-city newscast, not in their peaceful mountain enclave. The details of the case, as they slowly trickled out to the public, were particularly unsettling. The randomness of it, the sheer, inexplicable strangeness of the clues, tapped into a primal fear. If a responsible young man could simply vanish on his way to look at a car, then no one was truly safe. The bizarre elements, the lipstick, the puppy made the crime, feel like something more than a simple act of violence. It felt like a message, a taunt from a faceless evil that had infiltrated their community. People began to lock their doors more diligently. Parents held their children a little closer. A shadow of suspicion fell over the town. The case became a topic of hushed conversations in coffee shops and grocery store aisles. Theories, both wild and plausible, were exchanged like currency. Was it a drug deal gone wrong? A crime of passion? A random act of violence by a passing stranger? The name Jason Owens was whispered, but without an arrest, he remained just one part of the sprawling, unsettling mystery. The case became a fixture in the local newspaper, the Asheville Citizen-Times, and on the local news channel, WLOS. Each new, fruitless search and each frustrating lack of progress was reported, keeping the community on edge. Zeb Quinn became more than just a missing person. He became a symbol of a lost sense of security. His smiling face on the missing person flyers was a constant, haunting reminder that the safe, predictable world they thought they lived in was, perhaps, just an illusion. The mountains, which had always felt like a protective embrace, now seemed to hold a darker, more threatening presence. The crime revealed a crack in the town's idyllic facade, a glimpse into a darkness that no one wanted to believe could exist in their beautiful corner of the world. For years, the Zeb Quinn case file sat on a shelf in the Asheville Police Department's cold case unit, a silent, grim monument to a crime without a resolution. The initial flurry of activity had long since faded, replaced by the slow, grinding passage of time. Leads had dried up. No new witnesses had come forward. Jason Owens, though still living and working in the area, remained untouchable, shielded by the lack of concrete evidence. For the investigators who had worked the case, like Detective Gauntz, it was a source of enduring professional frustration and personal regret. It was the case that got away, the puzzle they could never quite solve. But for Denise Quinn, the passage of time brought no peace. It was a constant, unending state of limbo, a wound that could not heal because there was no finality. She became her son's most tireless and vocal advocate, a mother transformed by grief into a relentless warrior for justice. She gave countless interviews, her face etched with a pain that was still as raw as it was on the day her son disappeared. She organized yearly vigils, keeping Zeb's memory alive, refusing to let the community forget the bright, gentle young man who had been stolen from her. Every small, unidentified bone fragment discovered by a hiker in the vast Pisgah National Forest would bring a fresh wave of agonizing hope and subsequent despair. She provided her own DNA to national databases, praying for a match that would bring her, if not her son, then at least his remains. A place to visit, a final resting place to mourn. The world moved on. The city of Asheville continued its meteoric rise as a tourist destination. Friends of Zeb grew up, got married, had children of their own. But for the Quinn family, time was frozen on January 2nd, 2000. Jason Owens also moved on with his life in a more literal sense. He married, had children, and continued to live in the area, a seemingly ordinary family man with a dark cloud of suspicion perpetually hanging over his head. To those who knew about the case, his presence in the community was a jarring and uncomfortable reminder of the unresolved crime. He was a ghost from the past, living a normal life in the present. Then, in the spring of 2015, 15 years after Zeb Quinn vanished from the face of the earth, that ghost would violently re-emerge. The darkness that had touched the Quinn family was about to erupt again in an act of such brutality that it would finally and irrevocably drag the secrets of the past out into the light. Asterisk, 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 in March of 2015, the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office received a worried call from the family of Christy and Joseph, J.T. Codd, the couple who lived in a quiet rural home in the town of Leicester, the very town Zeb Quinn was heading to on the night he disappeared, had not been heard from in several days. Christy was a well-known figure, a former contestant on the reality TV show Food Network Star, and her sudden silence was alarming. When deputies performed a welfare check at their home, they found the doors unlocked and the couple's dogs and cats left without food or water. Their wallets and keys were still inside, but their vehicle, a Honda CR-V, was missing. The scene inside the house told a story of sudden, violent disruption. It was clear that this was not a couple who had simply gone on an impromptu trip. This was an abduction. As the investigation into the Codd's disappearance intensified, detectives began to look at those closest to them, including their neighbors. They learned that the couple had recently hired a local man to do some construction work around their property. His name was Robert Jason Owens. The name sent an immediate jolt through the law enforcement community. Detectives who had been with the Asheville PD for years, who still carried the weight of the Zeb Quinn case, knew this could not be a coincidence. The parallels were too chilling to ignore. Owens was brought in for questioning. He was also found in possession of items stolen from the Codd's home and had been seen driving their missing CR-V. During the interrogation, investigators looking into the Codd case noticed something suspicious on Owens' property, an area of recently disturbed earth near a pond. Armed with a search warrant, a team of forensic anthropologists and law enforcement officers descended on the property, a parcel of land where Owens had lived for years, including back in January of 2000. They began to dig. What they unearthed was a scene of pure horror. Buried in shallow graves were the dismembered remains of Christy and J.T. Codd. They had been brutally murdered. But the search did not stop there. The investigators, now certain they were dealing with a monster, expanded their excavation. They brought in ground-penetrating radar and heavy machinery. They were not just searching for evidence in the Codd murders. They were searching for Zeb Quinn. In a different area of the property, near a makeshift fire pit, they found something else. They unearthed a collection of items that seemed to have been buried for a very long time. There were fragments of fabric and leather that were consistent with the materials used in the interior of a 1990 Mazda Protege. They found hard plastic shards, some of which seemed to match the composition of a car's dashboard. And then they found the most damning evidence of all. Buried deep in the soil were bags containing a white, powdery substance. It was identified as industrial-grade quicklime, a caustic material that is often used by killers to destroy evidence and accelerate the decomposition of human remains. While Zeb's body was never found, the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. This property, this piece of quiet mountain land, had been Owens's personal graveyard. He had, the evidence screamed, used the very same methods to dispose of Zeb Quinn 15 years before he murdered the Codds. The long, cold winter of the Zeb Quinn case was finally over. The patient, methodical work of the investigators on the Codd case had, at last, thawed the frozen mystery. In July of 2017, after 17 years of suspicion, lies, and agonizing uncertainty, a grand jury formally indicted Robert Jason Owens for the first-degree murder of Zeb Quinn. The wheels of justice, which had been stuck for so long, began to turn at last. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The trial of Robert Jason Owens for the murders of Christy and J.T. Codd was a media sensation, drawing national attention. For the Quinn family, it was a prelude, a dress rehearsal for the justice they had sought for nearly 2 decades. They attended the trial, sitting in the cold, sterile courtroom, watching the man they knew had killed their son as he faced accountability for another, equally heinous crime. The prosecution laid out a meticulous and horrifying case. They presented evidence of the robbery, the stolen items, and the brutal manner in which the Codds had been killed and dismembered. The testimony was graphic and heartbreaking. But for Denise Quinn, the most powerful moments came when the prosecution presented the evidence found buried on Owens's property. As they showed photographs of the plastic sheeting, the leather fragments, and the bags of lime, she was not seeing evidence of the Codd murders. She was seeing the ghost of her son's final moments. This was the proof she had waited so long for, the physical corroboration of what she had always known in her heart. In his closing argument, the prosecutor stood before the jury, his voice filled with a quiet, controlled anger. He pointed at Robert Jason Owens, a man who sat at the defense table looking impassive. almost bored. "For 15 years, the prosecutor began, his voice echoing in the silent courtroom. "This man, Robert Jason Owens, walked among us as a free man. He was a neighbor, a husband, a father. He went to work. He paid his bills. He lived a life. But underneath that veneer of normalcy, a monstrous secret festered, a secret buried in the dirt of his own backyard. We are here today because of the unspeakable crimes he committed against Christy and J.T. Codd. But as you consider the evidence of their murders, I want you to remember that this was not the first time he made someone disappear. This was not his first act of calculated, brutal violence. This was a pattern, a methodology. The evidence you have seen, the dismemberment, the attempts to destroy remains with fire and lime. These are not the actions of a first-time killer. These are the practiced, refined techniques of a man who has done this before. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the jury. Look at the evidence found on his property. The plastic, the lime. These are the tools of a man who knows how to make a body vanish. And for 15 years, he got away with it. He got away with the murder of a kind, gentle 18-year-old boy named Zeb Quinn. He crafted a story, a bizarre, unbelievable lie about a fender bender and a mysterious page, and he used that lie as a shield. Today, with your verdict, you have the power to break that shield. You have the power to hold him accountable, not just for the lives of the Codds, but for the life of every person he has harmed. You have the power to show him that no secret stays buried forever. The jury found Robert Jason Owens guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to a minimum of 59.5 years in prison, ensuring he would die behind bars. For the Codd family, it was justice. For Denise Quinn, it was a victory, but an incomplete one. The man who killed her son was locked away, but his official conviction for Zeb's murder had not yet happened. That would have to wait. Faced with spending the rest of his life in prison, his legal options exhausted, Owens finally decided to break his silence, but only on his own terms. In 2022, 22 years after Zeb vanished, he agreed to a plea deal. He would not stand trial for Zeb's murder. Instead, he pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of accessory after the fact to first-degree murder. It was a legal maneuver that allowed him to avoid another trial and another life sentence. As part of the deal, he was required to finally tell the world what happened on January 2nd, 2000. But what he offered was not a confession. It was one last, self-serving, and convoluted story. He now claimed that he had, indeed, lied for all those years, but only to protect himself. The real killer, he alleged, was another man named Wesley Smith. He painted a picture of a sordid love triangle involving Zeb, a woman named Misty Taylor, and her supposedly jealous boyfriend Smith. Owens claimed that on that fateful night, Smith, in a fit of rage over Zeb's interest in Misty, had shot and killed him. Owens's only role, he now insisted, was helping to dispose of the body out of fear that Smith would kill him too. It was a shocking 11th-hour accusation, a desperate attempt to shift the ultimate blame. Misty Taylor and her family vehemently denied this new story, calling Owens a manipulative liar who was trying to hurt even more people from behind bars. Wesley Smith, who was never charged, maintained his innocence. The authorities found Owens's new account to be inconsistent and largely unbelievable, but because of the plea deal, it became the final, official word on the case. Owens never revealed the location of Zeb's remains. The plea deal closed the case file, but it did not close the book. It provided a conviction, but it did not provide the full truth. Zeb Quinn was declared legally dead. A killer was held accountable, but only in a roundabout way. His final story, a last, defiant act of manipulation. The questions that had been born from a pair of lipstick lips and a lonely puppy in the back of a car were, in the end, never fully and truly answered, leaving Zeb's family with a hollow, incomplete form of justice. The mountains still hold their secrets, and somewhere within them, Zeb Quinn still waits to be found.